Hello and welcome to This Contains Garlic. You are here with your hosts Georgia Garlic and
Mark Garlic.
and we are back for episode 5. And today, Mark, what are we going to talk about?
Today we're going to talk about different types of diets
Oh,
and different scenarios when
Mark
it
loves a
comes
scenario.
to dieting, when it's relevant, when it's not relevant,
Yeah.
and
And
just more like really relevant things like when you're working and dieting, when you have a family, and having to navigate those kind of different
situations.
situations.
Yeah, so I think first things first, I think just to clarify, like what a diet really is. In terms of the dictionary, a diet is technically what you consume on a day to day basis. It's not a dieting method, it is a diet. It is your overall what you consume, liquid and solid, every single day.
And what would impact your diet?
Well, a lot of things. It could be potentially your environment. It could be your work, your work lifestyle. It could be your personal preferences of food. It could be allergies. It could be a number of different things as to what,
True. Food
um,
availability and
yeah, as
stuff
to
like that.
like how you actually eat on a day-to-day basis. And we always say that like the best diet you will ever have is the one you're currently, I guess,
Currently you're eating
eating. But
with some
then with
adjustments.
some I love that, with some adjustments.
No, minor
I think what we
adjustments.
mean is like, there's no point putting yourself onto certain other dieting methods if you can consume what you like to consume, but just within the amount that's right for you, and not put that sort of limiting factor onto yourself. And I think it's also important to understand that if you do enjoy certain dieting methods, which some people do, like
Yeah,
we're
sure.
talking popular ones such as could be a keto diet, could be you've implemented time restrictions, so intermittent fasting. It could be a number of different things.
Flexible dieting,
Flexible
if it
dieting,
fits your
calorie
macros,
counting. These are all
calorie counting.
effectively methods as to how to diet in a
Mm.
way. And some people thoroughly enjoy following sort of dietary methods to a degree. So if we're going to something like keto, some people might prefer a higher fat, higher protein diet.
Sure.
But what we're trying to say is you don't need to undertake these methods, as it's not your only way of, I guess,
I
improving
think
your.
the understanding that regardless of which dietary method you want to choose, the main principles of you adjusting it to your total daily energy expenditure and how many calories you're burning through exercise and things like NEAT and the macro composition of your meals, like regardless of which diet you choose, you still have to adhere to the
Yeah.
laws of thermodynamics in terms of weight loss and weight gain is predetermined by how many calories you consumed
Okay, so what you're trying to
compared
say is the
to
fact that every diet that you do, you're going to have to restrict something. And
energy. There has to be some acknowledgement to your energy balance, whether it's expending calories through movement or exercise or calorie restriction through then insert in your dietary method that suits your lifestyle.
so if you were to, we'll start with probably the most common, I guess, what we advocates for, and it's not for everybody, I guess, is a combination of a few. We like the fact that if you want the best outcome, that like tracking calories would be your best bet to a degree, or the fact if you wanted to improve your nutritional like input, you would then obviously look to keep a pattern and a track,
Sure.
keeping track of
Yeah.
what you are consuming and making sure you're getting enough nutrition in. And I think tracking has always been the most accurate way, and that's
Yeah.
why it has such great success for people.
It's like the most effective for us. It's the most effective way of obtaining a result because you're understanding all the different inputs that go into your diet. It's not a long term, like
Yeah,
you
tracking
need to
shouldn't be
track
for
for the
long.
rest of your life. It's just done so that you can gain an understanding of the different foods that you like to consume, that you have availability to, and that you enjoy.
Yeah, I think also it's like, knowing the numbers to things then can lead to you having a more flexible approach with your nutrition. Like, as we said, like, we don't want people to ever track forever. Like, it should be used as a tool, just like every one of these dietary methods should be used as a tool. It shouldn't be, the thing that you do every single day for the rest of your life, because
No.
you need to come to terms. And if you're not being educated on the dietary method in which you're undertaking, you're going to end up with never being able to come off of that diet because you
Yeah,
don't know what it is and what it's doing. And
exactly.
and so you always feel like you need to be on that diet to be able to
Mm,
maintain that weight. So I think with tracking, it obviously educates you massively,
it
empowers
does.
you with the knowledge as to what you're eating and how much of it you're eating, which allows you to not only eat what you want technically, but it also allows you to then think, okay, well, I'm going to use my intuition now. I
Yes.
roughly know X amount, and that's when okay, well, if I need to, I don't
You
know.
can eyeball it or
Yeah.
guesstimate it.
But and then if we were to move on to obviously what I mean, I'd say calorie tracking is up there with probably at the moment one of the most popular tools to lose weight, which is great because finally, like, this has actually
Yeah.
come about. However, I would still say there's a very, very, very strong outline of other dietary methods which people undertake without actually probably knowing that much about what they do and
Yeah.
what is needed, I guess, in the long term, because as we said, like, your diet is not something that you should be like chopping and changing all the time. So
No, it's not something that you switch on and off, and it's something that you need to look. If you can't do it for the next 6 months to a year, then it's probably not something that you should embark on, because it's fortifying diet culture narratives of restriction to a certain degree, depending on what diet you choose.
yeah.
And then nobody has willpower 100% of the time, and motivation generally does tend to wane. So it's then the 10 steps forward, 12 steps backwards yo yo cycle that then starts to develop when you restrict, unrestrict,
I
restrict,
think going off what you said,
unrestrict.
I would actually disagree in a way. I think it should be something that you should stick to for, like, be able to go, adhere to for way more than a year. Like, at the
Yeah,
end
a
of the
year
day, like,
plus.
most of the time, if you've got like a strong mind to it and you want to achieve a goal, some people will happily diet for
Let me
6 months
Okay,
of a
let me
year.
clarify that statement. Us under the assumption that within that 12 months, an individual is then able to adopt new habits that then become, you're under the assumption that if somebody can stick to something for a year, the potential chance of them being able to stick to it for the rest of their life then substantially increases.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that you stick to every. I mean, like, if you think of, like, if you like to track, for example, then you don't track. I mean, you're not always necessarily.
Yeah, but if you tracked for a year, pretty consistently, you would make a
Yeah, I mean, this moves on to
vast
the
ton of
subject, which I think we've
progress.
always wanted to talk about, actually, just briefly off it, is, like, always searching for the next best, like, thing, because you do sometimes get to a point when, as a human, you can do so stuff in so much routine that you start to become bored of it. And then
Yeah.
when you become bored of it, or you don't, or not necessarily that, a lot of things that help you, we always find problems with. Like,
Yes.
we always find a flaw
Yeah.
for things that
It's always
actually help
becomes
us.
Yeah, the method then becomes the issue when it's not necessarily the method that's the issue. It might be a lack of motivation. It could be something that crops up in your day-to-day life that has,
Yeah.
changed
I
your
th- I think,
personal
and so, like,
circumstances.
and then when you do get bored, you're then like, okay, cool, like, what can I do next? Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, maybe I should try this because so and so's tried it, or
Yeah.
actually, this is probably going to see me better off if I do this, or
Hmm.
oh, okay, so and so said that if we do that, then I'll lose this, and I've put
Yeah.
on some weight and I don't know how to. When actually, it's just because, like, as we always say, like, calorie tracking and I guess following the principles of all of that is like, I mean, most people don't want to hear it because it's not that sexy, you know?
Yeah.
It's not like going to promise you really anything other
It's
than trying
yeah,
it.
it does. And
Well, it promises you a lot, you know, tracking that
no, it
stuff, but
does.
it doesn't necessarily, it's not the sexiest answer when you could knock back 6 different supplements and lose 10 pounds in a week.
Sure. Or
Obviously,
like
that's not true.
restrict a whole food group.
Yeah, I mean, moving on to this, like talking about like dieting methods, like I would probably want to converse about stuff like people understanding the keto diet more before thinking about whether or not they should undertake, you know, something which is a very drastic method and not going
Yeah,
to.
I think the keto kind of crops up every now and again. It kind of like flares up in
A lot in
popularity.
America, I think, you
Yeah,
know,
a lot in
but
America. But
you know, there's plenty of people that we have either known or have been associated with in some degrees that sell fucking ketones, whatever.
oh
Those
yes,
bloody sachets. Do not, just
yeah,
do not believe that shit. Unfortunately, another thing where it's worked for somebody because they've restricted their calories alongside and exercise
yeah.
frequently.
You got to
That
understand the context of the individual. It's like, yeah, okay, so you go into the gym twice a
well, no,
day.
actually, I'd say
You're
most
not eating
people.
carbs. You're not doing a whole variety of different calorie adjustments and expenditure adjustments, and then of course you're seeing progress.
Well, most of the people that sell these kittens, if they're not like a complete and utter like Z-lister, which is just trying to make a quick buck, they are people who do have a lifestyle where they move more, or potentially they have
Yeah.
a coach or a trainer like
Yeah.
5 times a week.
Yeah.
They've got the ability, and they're like, and they themselves are obviously
Potentially
showing
work from home and do 15,000 steps a day, and you know what I mean. It's all
it's all
contextual.
relative to, I guess, the situation. But I think what I would like to converse more is like what is a keto diet, and like what people, you know, should think about when they are looking at these dietary methods is something. Oh, maybe I should try.
I mean, the true definition of a ketogenic diet is generally a very high fat, moderate to high protein diet with no carbohydrates.
yeah, and obviously
Up to
there's
50 grams a day, but that's literally enough
and they
to
prefer you
feed
to
your
eat
brain.
like strawberries rather than like
Yeah.
a starchy carb of any
They say
degree.
brain function, your brain requires about 50 grams of carbs a day.
So like, obviously keto came about to help, I guess, neurological
Yes,
disorders.
made very popular by Tim Noakes, the sports scientist based in Cape Town, but has been known to have been debunked with a lot of the claims that he put out.
Yeah, but he also, I mean, obviously it was a huge practice for those that had epilepsy.
Yeah, no,
or-
there is very strong studies that have shown very positive benefits with children with epilepsy and regulation in carbohydrates.
But again, this is something that has to be managed. It's not something you just go and put yourself on. If you are obviously
Yeah,
epileptic,
and
or your
let's-
child is, suffering with epilepsy.
We have both known people that have gone on to ketogenic diets and stuff like that, where you can't just go free reign, fat and protein.
No, my God. You know,
Do
this
you
is
know
the
what I
thing.
mean? And, like,
Keto's always
eat
sold like
handfuls
his-
of butter
yeah.
and pork scratchings, and you've still got to
Adhere
adhere
to, yeah.
to the overall umbrella of metabolic outputs
Yes,
and
but
inputs.
keto will make it's not easier in any sense. What we're trying to say is it will be made easier adhering to those principles when you cut out and exclude
Yeah.
such a large
Huge
macronutrient
amounts,
group.
yeah.
Like,
And then you're replacing it with lean proteins, which are very, very satiating, so that you're statistically going to be eating fewer and fewer calories.
yeah, and that's obviously if you like eating a lot of meat. Like doing a keto diet and being a vegan or a vegetarian is just not possible. And
those
we
are-
would strongly,
think those are
suggest
two
never
opposite
to.
ends
Yeah,
of the
completely.
spectrum,
So like,
yeah.
if you are a vegan or vegetarian or you're plant based in your manner, like keto
Yeah.
is something that you shouldn't even be. And I'm sure you're probably not, to be quite honest
I
with you,
don't
because
even
it's
think
a lot
it's
of
possible.
it. No, I'm sure you could. You just sit there with, well, actually, that would be really hard.
Because the your protein sources would have to be plant-based,
yeah.
which some protein sources also have high amounts of carbohydrates in them.
Yeah. So they say obviously when you're keto or you're following a keto diet, you obviously have to cut out, you're talking sugar groups, everything that comes in carbs. And
Rice,
carbs also covers,
potatoes.
vegetables, fruit. Like they say that obviously you can potentially have like 50 grams of strawberries a day, but like 50 grams of strawberries a day, if you've weighed that, is one strawberry. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so that's if you're on the more flexible end of keto. But if not, you are completely removing every type of carbohydrate.
Yeah.
And I guess why is that? I mean, why do they take the carbs away for you to what happens to your body when
Your
you go
body
through
essentially then goes into a ketogenesis, where obviously the name is derived. Your body then, once in ketogenesis, starts to increase the fat utilization. So basically, using your fat as fuel.
keto? Yeah, that's
Which
also another marketing.
doesn't necessarily mean that you're burning fat. You're using fat because fat is the only available source of energy. So
Yeah.
you're not necessarily losing body fat. You're using it, and using and losing is
Two
two
very
very
different,
different things.
yeah.
But this is where the muddled marketing comes into play. And people cherry picking certain arguments when it comes to trying to validate their own scientific agenda.
Yeah. Like using like fat for fuel is
Fat
a very big.
oxidization and things like that as trigger marketing words and things like that. But it's very different, because you can still be in a ketogenic diet if you're still in a calorie surplus. You're still going to put on weight.
Yeah, but this is what people don't understand. But what for majority of people who have maybe tried keto for a period of time and seen results, or potentially like live their life for keto, will say, well, it works because, I've done it and I've achieved it. But realistically, for your average person, and even for somebody like me, carbohydrates are your biggest source of energy. And as much as like stuff like protein is obviously advised for satiation and for muscle mass and all of the stuff, and you need
But it's
a
also
minimum fat intake.
It's also more readily available. Like if you're your average general population individual who doesn't maybe have time to cook breakfast before going to work and things like that, and you're going to pick up a sandwich, you're not going to be able to pick up.
No.
Very few
Good
people
luck
have
what
the
you're picking up
luxury
in
of
the
cooking,
supermarket.
nice scrambled eggs, and then even if you're having like cold boiled eggs at the office, like
Yeah, do you know what I
that's
mean?
a
Like,
strong no.
life is so much better
So,
than that.
carbohydrates are more convenient, but if you just take a step back and you compare like to like, if you've ever been on that ketogenic lifestyle and you see progress, it's because, your convenience carbohydrates and a vast majority of your general consumption was removed, and
That meant that obviously then, your energy balance
changes.
changed, and
You're eating satiating protein, so it's very hard to overeat like chicken breasts and fillet steak. That you get to a certain point where
oh
you're
my
like,
God, yeah. And if you struggle to get enough protein intake in
the
now,
meat sweats.
like, Mark, that's for people that overeat on meat, which is just like a bit gross at like one of those like barbecue grill places. But like, anyway. Just imagining a world buffet in my
Bodines.
Bodines, yeah. But yeah, no, I think when you remove, protein itself, like is very hard for people to intake enough of, like anyway. So then when you take away what you really enjoy, like a lot of people don't necessarily enjoy eating a can of tuna, but they might quite like a tuna on
Bagel.
Why do you always say bagel?
I love
If you want to
bagels.
know, Mark is literally obsessed with bagels. Like the bagel is just something that is never
A
forgotten
bold
about.
statement, but I reckon if there was like a bagel eating competition, I would be in the top 3.
Maybe we should launch a bagel eating competition.
Not speed, just
Not speed.
Not. I don't want to
No,
do it
Mark,
fast.
you also eat
just
with
slowly.
speed. The other day you told me that you needed to slow down your eating.
I needed to be more mindful of my chewing.
When your parents used to tell you to chew your food properly. That's not Mark.
One thing the
Just
garlics are known
swallow
for, not so my side of the family, but we eat
animals.
like
They're
prisoners.
genuinely prisoners. I've never understood like how fast you guys all eat. Like in the sense when we go out for a meal and it's all gone within.
The way an African eats a chicken bone is very different
to how a British person would. Like for example, before I moved to South Africa and also married an African, I would literally eat like a chicken and leave like all
one
of
bite.
No, I'd literally have like just literally one bite of the
Yeah.
meatiest part you could get, and then I'd leave the rest. And then when I met Mark, it was literally like everything, just the bones left. If
Yeah.
anything, they probably eat the bones as well, to be
Do you
honest
know what I
with you.
mean? Like, oh, sorry, are you done with those?
Yeah, it's because inflation's so high in Zimbabwe. You don't want to be buying too
Oh
many
no,
chicken
you
wings.
go right, you lick those things clean.
Clean. That's the only thing you're getting for a month. Like, sorry to upset you. Anyway, back to the keto diet. Anyway, it is obviously a method which a lot of people undertake. And I think just to summarize, there is no need for you to necessarily undertake something which is so drastic. If you enjoy those macronutrient groups, then obviously
Yeah, some people really like a keto
maybe it's for
diet.
you. But also just remember, unless you have all of these tests in place, finding out if you're on ketosis or not is actually quite challenging. Like, you eat on a
Yeah,
stick,
you
you've
have
got all these
to, if
kits.
you really want to go into like proper ketosis, you want to get yourself some pee sticks so that you can wee on them so you can see how many ketones are in your urine.
But then also, guys, like, again, this is all these things that if you've got the time for this shit, go ahead. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
If
and
you
I
really
mean,
love it. But realistically, if you don't, you listen to us
asking
and you're just
ladies to
thinking,
pee on
fuck's
things and
sake.
stuff like
Yeah.
that's also a bit weird.
Yeah, like, just hi, just like, can you just piss on this and
Yeah.
then come out with the results with like dripping piss all over it? Do you know what I mean? Gross. Do you know what I mean? It's like when you go and do a urine test.
Hi, Susan, that's looking rather purple today.
I think we're
Are
near
you a
to
bit
ketosis.
dehydrated?
I think we might be nearing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just a bit weird. And I think,
Yeah.
look, if you have the time and you're really anal on it and you want to manage it, then fine. But it's not benefiting you
Yeah.
any other way unless you potentially, obviously, as we said, a lot of studies and research is done in neurological disorder, and this is something we're not going to try and
Yeah, you
speak
can't
about
group
that
the
too
two
much
things
now.
together
Yeah.
when people have like epilepsy and like when it's just a dietary fad. You can't compare the two, and
Yeah.
those are two completely different conversations.
Yeah, like completely, and we're not going to go into that because
Yeah.
it's medical stuff. But
Yeah.
moving on, I think talking about
think-
dietary.
The next one we should talk about is time restricted eating or intermittent fasting.
You just
There's-
restricted
Pardon?
time. You just said something
Time
different.
restricted.
Yeah, you didn't say restricted. If you go back, it was something else than that.
Okay. Sorry, time restricted fasting. Or intermittent fasting. There's obviously many variations.
Yeah. I think this became to light as being, and again, obviously, I would say, like, look, everybody fasts every day, okay? So think
Yeah.
about it like this. When you go to sleep and you're not eating and you're not consuming any liquid,
Assuming
you are
you
fasting.
sleep 8 hours, yeah.
When you have a break from eating, you are fasting.
Sure.
The way that people capitalized on this, I think at the start, it was very much like the 5-2 diet, which 5-2, FYI, was 5 days of eating normally and 2 days of eating, if I'm not mistaken, it was maximum of 500 or 800 calories
Between 5
for
and
those
8,
2 days a week. So overall,
Yeah.
again, just a quick highlight, that is just reducing your calorie intake.
Yeah, so if you look at your calorie consumption over a weekly basis, you're just reducing 2 days down to then try and get
a weekly average.
a
that's
weekly
less.
average that is
So,
less.
like, talking maths, it would mean that, like,
Yeah.
if you ate 2,000 calories a day for 5 days, and on your 2 days where you had to fast, or
Yes.
bring in fasting methods, you ate 500 calories, which
Yeah.
means you're saving technically 3,000 calories that you would normally have eaten for those 2 days
Sure.
at the end of the week, which means, again, weight loss, obviously.
Yeah,
because you're
from the
eating less.
overall acknowledgement of the principles of calories in versus calories out.
Yeah, because, like, this is when dietary methods don't really make sense.
But
because
that's under the assumption that you are so you've obviously gone the whole day of not eating and you've only eaten 500 to 600 calories, and then the next day you're ravenously hungry. That's under the assumption that you're not just going to go
Yeah.
absolutely AWOL, because
Yeah, because majority of the time, if you haven't eaten anything the day before, you in your mind sometimes think you need to make up for it.
We've both had clients who that's a tongue twister,
have had
have
clients.
had clients who have undergone those things, the time restricted fasting and things like that. And when it comes to feeding, the feeding is overboard because it's
Yeah.
either knowing that you're going to restrict yourself later or having come off some level of vast restriction.
It's that sort of, in my opinion, it's the reward factor that you've done
Yeah.
something that you don't need to, and you
Yeah.
have to be very regimented. Like I have known a lot of people that along my years in the industry that have succeeded quite well on stuff like 5-2 because it's, you know, but are they doing it now, and is it a dietary method they choose to do now, or would you, no, not really, because they didn't like the fact that 2 days a week was so limited, and then they also didn't understand and were never taught the principles as to
Yes.
why 5-2 really is working.
Yes.
So then when they came off of it, or you know, they didn't understand why now if they're eating full amount 7 days a week,
Sure.
that why they'd put all the weight back on. And actually it is about anything you do. Education is really the first and foremost point, because
Yeah.
if you don't have any understanding or any research as to behind why you're undertaking it, and you're doing it because somebody else has done it,
Yeah,
you
or
are
it's like
never,
the hottest topic or some
yeah, you're
celebrities
never going to
doing it.
understand like what the
Yeah.
principles are. So, you know, you could see somebody who has lost 2 stone doing, you know, keto diet, intermittent fasting, paleo, you name it.
Juice fruits.
But do you know why? It's not because of those methods, it's because of the principles that they've been using to manipulate their overall calorie intake. So without your why and the knowledge behind what you are doing, you are going to fail afterwards. And I think that's why stuff like tracking or potentially
Just-
structured planning, you know,
Or just further education on your
Well, it doesn't-
nutritional input.
even if you're not tracking the numbers, you can track the sense of your nutrition, so you can understand more that educates you that, oh, I can have that. It's just, you
Yeah.
know, it's stuff that needs to be balanced out. You know, when you go on a dietary method, the counting thing is not something that is highlighted unless obviously you're on sort of a point system like a
Sure.
Weight Watchers or a Slimming
Yeah.
World. You know, you're not counting necessarily, you're just eating what you're being told to eat,
Yeah,
which is
yes or
probably
no.
like yes, no, red
Yeah.
food, bad food, good food, you know,
Yeah.
don't eat this, eat
With
that.
no understanding of, okay, well, what's the macronutrient composition of these foods? How many calories does it contain per 100 grams?
Yeah, because like,
So
for
on and so
example,
forth.
if not, you go onto a diet like, I don't know, the keto diet that we were just talking about, and you could go and have like 6 cheeseburgers in the evening, obviously
Yeah.
without the bread, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I would be putting on weight,
Patties,
you know what I mean?
cheese,
Eating,
you go, all in, yeah.
yeah, cooking it in oil, then having some butter
Yeah.
in my fucking coffee. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
all of this, that is so much, you know, more calorie intake than you probably would have. And then you're like, oh my God, I'm meant to be losing weight, but I'm actually putting it on. You just need to understand always the why, I think.
I
And
went
so,
to a barbecue once and there was a girl eating butter out of the container.
yeah,
And
that's
because she was
just
like, I'm on a ketogenic diet, so I can eat as much fat as I like.
anybody that eats butter like that, please,
Yeah.
please, like,
Just
I don't know,
have
some
a,
people
have, a,
love
have a chat
butter.
to somebody.
I don't mind butter. It's got to be melted.
Just
I don't
not,
like the look of butter.
not straight though.
Yeah, Mark, you eat. Okay, let's go on to this. Mark eats on his bagels peanut butter and butter. Now that's very controversial because
Yeah,
I'm like,
nah,
peanut butter is butter. It's butter. It's there to be spread. I wouldn't put like Nutella with butter. Like that's rank. You'd want just Nutella, surely. The spread. But the only thing I disagree on
That's
that is
hard,
jam,
though.
actually, because I think jam without butter is quite sad, actually.
I think I agree
So
with you with
most
Nutella
spreads are not
and
meant
butter.
to be mixed, in my opinion.
I just think butter and peanut butter
Would you have
together
butter and
taste
mayonnaise?
delicious. No.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same fucking thing. It's like
Yeah,
fat
but
on
you wouldn't
fat.
just
It's
eat a
weird.
mayonnaise sandwich, just straight mayonnaise.
But would you no? But would you
That's
eat
weird.
butter mayonnaise with? Guess actually you would, because I know you've eaten it
Yeah, I
before.
would. Yeah, I would. Butter, mayonnaise, little ham, cheese, tomato, sandwich,
We're going to
baguette.
start eating, maybe quick snack. Should we have a time out on here?
Yeah, let's have a
Have
pause.
a Kit Kat, have a
Yeah.
break. Anyway, back to time restricted eating. So obviously it did become a lot more popular because the book launched the 5-2 diet.
Yeah.
And then I think it's moved on. Obviously, a lot of religions follow periods of fasting,
Yeah.
obviously as a religious festivity, or and so we appreciate that side. You know, some of those, you know, that's more cultural and environment.
Yeah, it's still also very different topics. This is
very much based off of weight, not other aspects. I think if you're actually going to talk about intermittent fasting, I guess obviously, as we said, there's different versions and different variations of fasting, but as an overview, how it works is it limits your time, the time you eat throughout the day.
Yeah.
It limits it to a period of time in which you can consume calories,
Yeah.
with the hope that that will enable you to reduce your overall or daily, weekly calorie intake.
So if you had a feeding window between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., that would be the only time essentially that you could eat, and then you would be advised not to eat outside of that window. But the vast majority of your calorie consumption comes at night after work, and generally in the evening when you consume the most amount of your calorie intake. It is during...
Well, statistically, yes. I mean, like, a lot of people can still nail to themselves to the ground between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Yeah.
But on average, that's when we are busiest as humans, unless you're obviously working shift work. But like in the sense of like, if you are working a normal 9 to 5 job, like that's when you're going to be busiest, is like where you're not potentially... Well, that being said, you know, I remember when people used to work in offices and like used to say that it was like the mid-afternoon like snacking that became an issue. But in a sense of it limits the time period in which you consume food. So majority of the time they'll say like you can start eating at say midday and you can eat until 6 p.m. And so that gives you 6 hours to eat food. Now, even if you went and had a huge meal within that, the likelihood is within X amount of time of how hungry you would get within 6 hours for another huge meal. So it's not to say that it's not doable. So like,
but you could still, let's say your total daily energy expenditure is 2,200 calories. If you had one huge meal and you still had 1,300 calories, 1,400 calories in one sitting, you would still create a huge deficit. But like Georgia just touched on, the chances of you being hungry another 2 to 3 hours within your feeding window would be very small.
Yeah, which means that those hours that are between, 6 p.m. in the evening and 12 p.m. the next day, like you're not eating anything. And it's like, if you do that consistently over a long period of time, you're going to be creating quite a large deficit in your daily routine. However, where it goes wrong and people think it doesn't necessarily work for them is when they don't understand the principle of intermittent fasting, because it does just come down to like, you can still overeat,
So this is all hypothetically assuming you create a deficit, but you could within your feeding window still overeat your total daily energy expenditure and create a surplus.
Easily. I mean, it doesn't like you could literally... No, is that we're going to talk about nuts, are we?
Nuts
well,
are
a good old honey roasted cashew.
I'm not saying I love nuts.
I don't love nuts. Okay, right. Where are we going right this?
No, I'm just saying, like almonds.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
Nuts.
Okay, Mark's talking about nuts, and it's got nothing to do with intermittent fasting. Just to say, you can go over your calorie limit within that time quite easily, but normally to what we would usually eat, if your time period is restricted, you can't get as much food in as you would normally want to or would naturally do. So that is where intermittent fasting becomes a useful tool for people. And being honest, like I tend to use it as a tool. I don't actually consciously use intermittent fasting, but I am fasting to a degree.
In the personal training industry, generally you intermittent fast a lot.
Yeah, because you're not going to... Sorry, I'm going to say this now. If you're a coach and you eat in front of your client, please don't. Like, that is one of the grossest habits you could do, is eat in front of a client. I don't care if they're like, oh no, please eat. They don't want you to eat. Like, and especially the food that we statistically would normally eat. Like, let's get out of a condensation Tupperware box. Like, some sorry, like, oh guys, sorry, I've just got to have a snack.
My prepped meal
or a prep meal. Please
2 weeks
eat
ago.
in your own time, not around people, that are clients and paying you. Anyway, on from that. We would
heating your food up in the microwave because you're just going to kill
especially
whatever
if it's like week 7 of cod.
And if it's fish, then
you've ruined the establishment. Like literally the smells. Anyway, I guess we need to go back to why we're even talking about heating up food. we would naturally, as trainers, obviously, if you're very busy, you wouldn't be eating quite a long time.
So you wake up super early, 5 in the morning. You need to be at the gym at 6. You maybe have a couple of clients back to back. You're not going to have a meal until...
We didn't normally eat till midday.
Yeah, midday.
Like, if we were lucky, sometimes we'd be so back to back. In fact, there's been so many times we've been so back to back that literally all we've managed to inhale is nuts, Mark.
Yeah, nuts.
Just a few
blueberries.
Nuts. A few blueberries. We used to work at studio.
Tesco's Express across the road
Express,
from
the petrol station.
Brompton
The world's
Cemetery.
shittest coffee, literally. That was like misery in a cup. Like
The employees there were the highlight
10
of
out
my
of
day.
10.
Though.
Yeah, they used to always be so nice. And we always used to be the only ones awake, always. We were always fucking awake. It was us, crackheads, and
people coming home from raffles.
yeah, crackheads. So like literally like... So I guess if anyone doesn't know, Raffles is a nightclub in Southwest London, which is...
And if you know, then you know.
If no, you know. Anyway, moving on from that, we would naturally obviously fast as trainers. So there is ways that we don't consciously go, I'm intermittent fasting today.
Yeah.
But you naturally adopt the method with your lifestyle. So say for example, people always used to say breakfast is the best meal of the day, or the most nutritious meal of the day. Where that came from was statistically the fact that if you fueled yourself well at the start of the day, I think back before nutrition really got into the nitty gritty to the general population, and probably when it expanded more and more online and information, breakfast was something which was like a bowl of Shreddies or like a bowl of Cheerios, and some milk. And what nutritionists didn't really want was people waking up and thinking that X amount of cereal with some milk was going to fuel you properly for a productive day. Because if you don't know, nutrition will massively fuel your brain for the day. So whatever you eat, you are going to project in some way, not in the sense of project, but you are going to, if you eat a shit processed diet, you are not going to necessarily feel as energized as somebody that eats a balanced, nutritious diet.
No, it's about optimization, and you're going to be not firing on all cylinders compared to having a nutritionally dense diet.
Yeah, so like where breakfast came about is because a lot of people were eating in that convenience time, piece of toast, butter and jam, leaving the house. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think in the overview, people wanted to say, actually, breakfast is a very good start of the day, and don't be afraid to have a good nutritious breakfast. And that's when the increase of stuff like egg intake probably went up, smoked salmon, instead of the convenience breakfast foods, which were known as something like cereal, toast, a croissant, or something that, was easy to eat and digest and would break the fast. But that's why breakfast is called breakfast, because it's breaking a fast. So, if we're going back to, if you don't like eating breakfast, then you're likely to not eat anything until lunchtime normally, unless you have like a really high calorie coffee in the morning. I don't know, but normally you're not eating.
Or a flapjack.
What is it about you, food? I feel like you're quite
I used
food
to
focused
get
today.
flapjack every day to work.
Oh.
I'm just having flashbacks.
Oh my God, did you actually?
Yeah, like 4:30 in the morning.
A flapjack, just sustain yourself. Do you know what I mean? A few
Wimbledon
oats.
Station.
Oats on the go. Anyway, so breakfast is obviously, if you don't eat breakfast, you're going to have had a period of fasting, and then you obviously, for me, I've never really thoroughly enjoyed eating breakfast that much.
Sure.
So there would be days I wouldn't consume breakfast, but there's other days where I could.
Have you always been like that? Have you always...
No, because I think back in the day when breakfast was the most important meal of the day, and God, you won't burn any fat throughout the day if you don't eat breakfast. And there was a lot of marketing off of eating breakfast. There was lots that would speed up your
What time frame are we talking about here? What year?
Oh, please, why are we doing you to go back to a yearbook?
No, I'm just asking.
I don't know, Mark. What year are we
No,
in now?
just like
Fuck,
point of reference.
2022. Years ago.
Okay, years
like
ago.
before I've been anywhere close to where I am now. Okay, let me give you a specific time as well. Would you like my WhatsApp location? Anyway, I think, back in there were a lot of marketing things for dieting trends that said about breakfast, and it could make you more metabolic, and, your metabolism would crash. You wouldn't crash if you didn't. And so people nailed it. Like, if you don't eat breakfast.
Revving your metabolism.
Yeah, rev your metabolism. Make sure, and so if you didn't eat breakfast, suddenly your whole nutrition was just shit. And so but actually now it is, as we're going back to intermittent fasting, it is a tool where people just don't, if they don't want to eat breakfast, you're not going to fucking eat breakfast. But we seem to have glorified that into a marketing trend that if you don't eat breakfast, suddenly you intermittent fast. It's
Yeah.
not you are intermittent fasting, but technically you're just having a break from eating, see it like that. So
I mean, if you, it's just slapping a label on it,
it's
do you know
just
what I
very
mean? It's
good.
just
It's
like,
very, very
oh,
good.
what are you
Yeah.
doing this week? I'm intermittent fasting, and then it's more of an identity than and creating a
It's because as
community of
humans we like to
people like minded.
categorize
Yeah,
like together,
we like to get into groups and
Yeah, and get into groups and make sure that our
yeah.
opinions are right
Yeah,
on
and then
those
you
groups.
feel relatable to other individuals that are doing the same thing as you, and it's
And then you
just
all end
slapping
up
a
like
label on
keyboard
not eating
warriors
breakfast.
online as a group, like
Yeah,
literally.
I
So,
mean, I think we're hopefully past that.
no, we're not definitely past the keyboard warrior of like
No, no,
groups.
it's
Definitely not. We
definitely
just
not.
don't try to involve ourselves with that. So
It's
if you
no,
don't realise
thank
why we
you.
don't really talk about dieting methods that much over social media,
Yeah.
that's the reason why. Because as we'll go back to, every dietary method that somebody has undertaken that has potentially worked for them for a period of time, they then think is the only method that is
Yeah,
doable. So
yeah.
putting out something that potentially could be
Counterproductive.
to their own end
Yeah, and
thoughts
it's
or
all about
processes.
context because everybody has their own personal life experiences, and like we've touched on before, we're all starting from different points. We're all running
Yeah.
different races, and to try and
Yeah.
adapt your life and your nutrition just to somebody doing a trend or something you've heard and stuff like that, when in reality all you need to do is understand your own metabolic rates and how many calories you consume and how many calories you expend.
Yeah, and actually then if we were to move on from time restricted eating into like understanding flexible what we like to call is flexible fueling actually, which is known as I guess flexible dieting.
Yeah,
And
flexible dieting, and then we also need to compare that to if it fits your macros.
yeah, well, let's get to the actual flexible dieting first. So, obviously, flexible dieting again goes off the rules like everything does of thermodynamics, which is obviously calories in versus calories out. But look, at first, I think actually, let's start with if it fits your macros, because first of all, can I just clarify for those that are listening that might not know what a macro is or if it fits your macros or macro counting? Macronutrients make up the largest part of your diet. Okay, so you're talking protein, fats, carbohydrates, and alcohol. Not yeah, I mean that's if you obviously can drink alcohol, but those are your groups, the biggest macro groups
Yeah.
of your in your diet. And macro counting or tracking came about where it kind of, instead of counting your calories, now obviously every calorie adds up to a gram of a macro, because if you think about it, like, not to get
Yeah.
into the maths of it, it all adds up to pretty much roughly the
Yeah,
same.
counting calories and counting macros
But it
is
was a
roughly the
way,
same thing.
if it fits your macros, it was a way of saying you can eat whatever the fuck you want
As long as
as
it
long as
fits
it fits your macro
macros.
targets. So say, for example, I could have 120 grams of protein a day, 200 grams of carbs, and I don't know,
40 grams
40
of fat.
grams of fat. I would then could eat whatever I wanted, but as long as those targets were adhered to. So
Yeah,
it
so
still
you
came
could
down to
get
tracking.
your 50 grams of, let's say, fat from
Ice cream.
ice cream or peanut butter or...
Back to the peanut.
Yeah,
Back to the nuts.
back to the nuts.
Nuts, yeah, these nuts, yeah,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah.
You could get, and then protein, you could, once you got your 120 grams of protein via whatever source you chose, that was ticked off. Carbs the same.
Yeah.
What it didn't necessarily teach, if it fits your macros, was a highly nutritious diet, unless your macronutrient selections were good enough. So
Yeah.
it kind of went through a phase, especially with bodybuilders, I would say, and the
Yeah.
bodybuilding environment, where you could eat these like waffles with like cookies and cream fucking
Pop Tarts was the
That was the
main thing in
starting.
the bodybuilding industry. People eating Pop Tarts.
Yeah, and it was like, oh my god, this fits my macros, you can have it
Yeah.
too. I'm hitting all my macro groups and I'm
They
making
were
progress.
very famous. This was around the YouTube age as well, where there were guys like Matt Ogus and a couple of other random people that really popularized if it fits your macros, and
Yeah, and I think like what it didn't really teach was the fact that like all these guys again,
it even
pinnacles of industries
it
that
went to the upper echelons of bodybuilding, onto the Olympia stage, where guys that were actually doing your bog standard bodybuilding diet, which was obviously just like chicken, rice, fish, beef, potatoes, and then leading into a ketogenic diet 10 days up until prep, up until the show, sorry. The guys that did if it fits your macros never did very well.
yeah, because then the macro composition that they
The,
chose, so meaning like instead of choosing maybe a balanced diet where
yeah,
it wasn't if it fits your macros and you took the approach that you wanted to be more
yeah.
nutritional than not, then you would end up
The thermic effect of the macronutrient composition of your foods then comes into play, because when you consume different macronutrient food groups, the amount of energy your body requires to break that down and utilize it differs from macro to macro.
yeah, so protein's obviously your highest thermic effect out of all of the macronutrients. And so if it
Then
fits
it's
your macros
carbohydrates,
and
then
you're
it's
not
fat.
prioritizing good quality protein,
Yeah,
then it's actually minimal what your body is
exactly.
receiving,
So
shall we
just
say.
eating 20 grams of protein is, when you get down into the nitty gritty, what is good quality protein? What is bad quality protein? What is the bioavailability of the protein? If you're eating 20 grams of protein from, let's say, for example, gelatin,
Yeah, which is a lot.
is that going to be the same as eating 20 grams of protein from a white fish?
Or a chicken breast.
You know,
Like not to
it's
be boring, but
no,
like it's
not
the same.
really,
It's a,
because of the
but also can we just
bioavailability.
gelatin? You wouldn't necessarily just eat gelatin sheets. Like the reason we're
Yeah,
saying
but
gelatin is
saying that
because
some of the
a lot of the
protein
that's what
bar,
I'm trying to say,
exactly,
Mark, is
is
the fact that a lot of the convenience foods that the ones that you'll see marketed as being
yes,
high protein, now they do contain 20 grams of protein or whatever they say on the back, but a lot of it comes from gelatin,
yeah,
which is kind of gross if you think about it. But anyway, so that's why eating 3 protein bars and a shake to get your protein and then eating just some fucking sides of carbs and fat somewhere is
yeah.
not the best way of getting huge amount of protein. If you're using convenience protein for just a snack, fine.
Sure.
Like we'll have like a
Yeah, it's
protein
about
milk or a
percentages. You don't want the vast majority of your protein intake coming from convenience-based protein sources, ideally.
yeah, so that's when if it fits your macros, then starts the nitty gritty as to whether it works or whether people
Yeah,
looked good on stage. Anyway, the overview is a lot of people followed that trend, and that's when I guess we could go on to flexible eating, where what we think is probably the better way of
yeah,
life with
yeah.
nutrition
I
is
agree.
if you're not tracking, then at least you could then use your intuition to a degree with flexible fueling, because it's about the thing with flexible eating is I think a lot of people thought it was kind of like if it fits your macros, you could eat
Yeah,
whatever the fuck you wanted and you would be flexible and you
sure.
just calorie count.
Yeah.
Now, calorie counting alone, forget any macronutrient, do you know what I
Yes,
mean, and
just
anything involved.
hitting a
Just
straight
hitting
target.
calories and following a deficit will help you lose weight.
Yes.
End of. However, it's how you feel in a way, how you feel every day,
Yes.
how you perform, how your jobs,
Optimization.
all of these things that come into play in the lifestyle as to whether or not just calorie counting
Yeah.
is wise.
So you could be hitting a certain calorie target and not eating enough protein to stimulate muscle growth and help you
Yeah.
recover from your workout. So just hitting a said target with no other sub targets,
Yeah,
it will
it's
help you lose weight if that's what your goal is. But generally, from our experience, the goal is not weight loss, it's changing your body composition,
yeah, because if you
because
go through a huge
you're
weight,
more set on looking a certain way than you are like dead set on weighing a certain number. So then it becomes about body composition. So just hitting a target with no consideration to the other fundamental mechanics that help adjust your body composition,
like what protein,
protein intake is
probably
probably
the big, yeah, the
the
most,
main
yeah.
driving factor. So when it
Or
comes,
highly processed foods all the time will also you'll see minimal.
Yeah.
It's the quality of your food then comes into play if you want to adjust your body composition, because eating, for example, you followed a calorie deficit for 5 months, you've maybe not exercised throughout that, and you've just followed the deficit in the sense of your calorie counting, and you've not thought or considered potentially what macronutrients your food makes up.
Exactly.
You're going to end up with probably, well, what suboptimal results, because your body composition won't represent what in this. It gets to the point where your body, it's just losing, I guess, weight. It's not really doing anything in the sense of your body shape to a degree, and a lot of people want to adapt their body shape.
When you lose weight, you will at some point lose some muscle mass.
Yeah, that's another guarantee.
If it's a cycle that repeats itself, where there's not enough amino acids stimulating muscle protein synthesis to retain muscle mass or to increase muscle mass, then the body, it's a free-for-all of losing weight to a certain degree, but also sacrificing muscle, which then knocks onto strength, which then knocks onto joints, then it's a cascading. And so forth.
So I think going back to flexible eating, what we like to call fueling, because I don't really like, as much as when we started this podcast, we said that a diet is genuinely just what you eat on a day-to-day basis. It's not a dieting, but the word has been so fucking
marketed.
It's just such an awful word now that they always say you can spell die and diet. Do you know what I mean? It's so it's one of these things that I don't really like to put a diet into this picture, but flexible fueling is something where the good old 80-20 balance comes in, where 80-20 is another way of people saying you can 80% of the time you're good and 20% of the time you're bad. That's where it first came about. Then it moved into actually being 80% nutrient dense and 20%, I guess, what you could call is less nutrient dense but more palatable.
More palatable.
I say that, but actually food, nutrient dense food can still be very, very palatable. I think it's one of these things where, but 20% imagine is for things that are maybe processed food, or things that are now every food is processed, but I'm talking convenient, not convenience-based necessarily, you might want some chocolate, might want some crisps. Mark's clearly very hungry. Crisps, as I've said in the last podcast, is like the death of me. No crisps allowed, otherwise it's the multi-pack gone. So what's that, a multi-pack of 12? Yeah, that's a multi-pack for 1.
I always like to go for the really weird flavours as well, just to test my palate.
Test your palate, do you know what I mean? And that's how sad life's really got. Mark would like to do a bagel eating contest and also have a more palatable crisp flavour. But anyway, so obviously you had 20% of your diet, which was the nice, what everybody markets as the nice stuff, what everybody used to call as junk food. I guess it still could be called junk food. It's all these labels. Anyway, it's
food.
It's the stuff that we are going to eat in our natural daily life, because unfortunately or fortunately, I don't fucking know. The UK obesity crisis would say unfortunately, but the convenience of these foods is so apparent in our day-to-day lives, it's hard not to consume it. So what we see is if we can try and aim for 80% flexible fueling of good, nutritious, nutritionally dense planned food, meaning that you're getting good meals in a day and hitting protein targets, then the rest of your calories is effectively then taken up by foods you really enjoy or just really would like to eat, a chocolate bar or, as Mark said, crisps. And that gives you a more educated approach long term to your overall nutrition.
Especially if you're tracking your calories, because then you can see what you like and what you don't like. You can make some substitutions.
And then you can also realise what you can have. And that is the biggest thing, because that is what will empower you to food freedom. People always bang on about food freedom as being it's not an easy thing to get to. And I still think that we will always subconsciously think certain foods are oh dear,
it's within our subconscious now that certain foods are bad for us, regardless of
when Jamie
how
Oliver
far you've gone down the
nuggets,
road.
Do you know what I mean? We know that having a McDonald's, for example, if we're going off of the old school Super Size Me and all of this shit, teaching you can still eat this shit, or demonizing it in a way, a McDonald's is it's not the most nutritionally balanced meal, but it might be the only thing that's available to you. But at the end of the day, like, is it going to be the most nutrient dense meal? No, it's not. Like, but you are going to probably at one point consume it, you know, and it's one of these things that you don't want to end up feeling like you can't in a degree.
No,
But I think
no.
that, you know,
It's all in context as well, like certain meals within like if you've been adhering to whatever dietary requirements you choose for 95% of the time, and then there's a day or two or a couple meals that you kind of go off track, then
I don't like that word off
it's,
track
yeah,
because I
I
feel
don't
like
like
it's
the
on
word track
track,
as
like you're
well.
on
It's like
track.
you're
It's
not
just,
doing
but like
anything, it's just life.
subconsciously, like
It's
we know that these things are
yeah.
not necessarily that great
Yeah, and I
for
don't think
us,
that
but
that will
it's
ever
still,
change because it's inherently been marketed to us from such a young age that there's always going to be something wrong with eating a donut
yeah, I
or,
know when like
do you know
actually
what I
like,
mean? Like you
but
always
then
have that level of guilt where you're like, oh,
yeah, I
after you've
don't know.
had
I
six
think
Krispy
it's, you know,
Kremes.
we're not like, you know, food freedom is one of those things where I think that like, you know, you're never you will escape food freedom if you empower yourself with enough like
Yeah, like if you know that
knowledge.
you've got enough calories to consume something within your overall calorie range, then you can at least sit down and enjoy it. Like you can have some ice cream, or you can have something, but you know that you budgeted those calories at the portion control as
Yeah.
well. And then after that, it's enjoying and savoring what you're eating and drawing a line under it, because at the end of the day, the thing that's going to be motivating you the most is making some level of progress with your nutritional
Yeah, and I think
habits.
like being able to, as we said, like throughout like stuff when you undertake a dietary method, like, you know, so from what we've talked about on here, something going back like I guess keto, like you don't want to get to the point where after you've done this method, or which is
Yeah,
inherently going to happen when you fucking give up, because it does happen when you
yeah,
start to go actually shit. So, you
yeah. I
know,
fancy a few beers
we've
or a
got a fucking
glass of
barbecue at
wine,
the
or
weekend and it's
yeah,
only hot dogs on the stand, but I'm just going to be eating a sausage. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
you know, and you start to, fuck, I don't know why, just that's not the best.
That would be miserable.
Well, to be honest with
Just eating
you,
loads of hot dogs, you'd feel ill afterwards.
Mark, you just said you wanted to do a bagel eating
Yeah,
competition.
but bagels and hot dogs are very different.
You think that I'm talking about one of those horrible Frankfurter sausages. Sorry if
Yeah,
you
that's
like
what I
them. They
grew
make
up
me,
with.
yeah, because that's what it was in
Or from
Zimbabwe.
Qualcomm.
Oh, gross. No,
Yeah.
I'm talking about like a nice sausage.
What kind of sausage are you talking about?
I don't
Like
fucking know.
boerewors.
I don't like boerewors. If you're South African, sorry, but like honestly, gross.
That's the one thing that I've tried to introduce to many English people, and they just don't like
Because it's like
them.
a boerewors is like a
Spicy.
spiced
Yeah.
sausage. I can't describe it.
But
It's not
if
like
you're
chorizo.
African, then
Chorizo.
you love it. I
Well,
love
not.
some
I've
boerewors.
known actually some Africans that don't like boerewors.
Name them. Name and shame.
No, we're not going to bring up the.
Name and shame them.
Actually, that's
They'll
actually a
be
really
shunned
shit
from their
statement. I don't.
community. They'll be shunned from their community.
I mean, anyway, let's not going back to eating hot dogs. You've got a barbecue at the weekend, like cutting out a food group and not understanding that you can have these things and all of this, like doesn't really allow you to have that educated approach long term to your nutrition. Now, as we said, you're not always going to track. Like you
Yeah,
go on
sure.
and off of periods of tracking, and normally you will track for a goal, you know, in
Yeah.
the sense of, and that's really important with tracking. You must have goals of tracking because
Yeah.
otherwise it can just feel like
Yeah, you
fucking
just
boring.
and, yeah, and obsessive to a certain degree over time. But it's a means to an end. But you can't also just assume that you can intuitively eat without understanding the macronutrient composition and calorie compositions of
Yeah.
foods,
So
because we inherently like to overconsume food, and if you don't understand the 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 knowledge behind the food groups, then intuitive eating to a certain degree, even though the true definition is that you're not looking to lose or gain weight with intuitive eating, you're just eating to intuition. So there's
yeah.
no real outcome, and that's another topic for another day. Like if you want to lose weight, then intuitive eating, essentially by dictionary terms,
Dick.
is not going to, is it's counterproductive. It's a non-goal
Yeah,
driven
because like we all
process.
think we know what we're eating. Like the amount of people that I would say, I'm just talking from my own bed, that I have dealt with, that will come to me like, well, I eat really healthily. I eat
Yeah.
really healthily. I have, you know what I mean? I do all of this, blah, blah, but they're eating like really calorie dense food. For
Yeah.
example, like, I'm not going off that, or they'll say like, oh, I'm not eating anything really.
Yeah.
And this is the thing with intuition. We're always going to tell ourselves what we want to hear.
Yeah,
And,
and
and
we forget
we
the bites here, the sauces, the this, the that.
And if you don't know
If
what
you
is in
don't
your food,
know,
like we're all finding out in the UK currently. If you live in the UK, a lot of restaurants have started placing calorie amounts
yeah,
on the food menus. Now, I have two different views about this. One, obviously, if you have been obsessive or you have an eating disorder or whatever, then obviously this isn't necessarily helping you. And it can sometimes demonize foods from you enjoying something.
true.
However, 95% of the population are obese at the moment. And that's actually a large set, but majority of the UK are what we classify as obese currently. And so placing calorie amounts on menus kind of opens up your eyes to make maybe a wiser choice.
Do you think when you were a heavier weight that understanding the calorie contents on foods that you're consuming would have changed any of your food choices when you were?
If I was eating out, maybe. It's like sometimes you look at menus and you're
Do you
like,
think
what the
that being in
fuck?
a
How have they
social
made...
situation also changes that, considering
It's
the
very
calorie
useful for those
content?
that are undertaking a journey to go, okay, well, I can have that. I just need to budget a few calories for it, or I need to have that
Okay, so
extra. So you can
okay, I see
pre-plan.
what you're
But
saying.
there are
Yeah.
some things that you're like, how the fuck does that have so many calories in? Like, you're like, in what way? Like, I don't want to do that. Like, what the fuck? Like, we were looking at menus of Deliveroo the other day, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I was like, okay, like in your mind, you're like, oh, I really want to eat that. But then you look at the numbers and you're like,
1,200 calories. You're like,
1,200, more like 1,700, some of those main meals I have. And if you're looking at the more calorie dense fucking foods, they're up at over 2,000 for like one meal. And that's like somebody's full daily intake in literally one meal. So it is one of these things where going back to the calorie account
yeah,
on
but
menus.
would it have
like,
changed your food choices when you were in a different frame of mind?
When I was very, very overweight, I loved to self-sabotage. So no, actually, I don't think it would have
Yeah.
really affected me. Like,
Yeah.
I think I would have just been like, you know what, fuck it, I'll do it twice. Like, because
Yeah,
I was
so
like,
there
it
you
kind of
go.
proved a point to myself that like I could do this. Like, I was known for ordering like a Domino's for a family of four, and then like when the door went and they were there, I'd end up like I'd be by myself, and I would literally be like,
Coming,
food's
Mum."
coming. Do you know what I mean? Like literally, and it's like because I've literally just got on the doorstep.
yeah,
This delivery man's
yeah.
like fucking trying to hold up like 4 pizza boxes
Yeah.
and all the sides. You know what I mean? Plus the cookies and the fucking
Yes.
drink, and you're
Yeah.
pretending like you're not about to go and inhale every single last bit of it yourself. And it is that sort of denial. And I think when you are very overweight, you do this secret. Like I was a classic secret eater when I was overweight. So it's one of these things where no, actually, I probably would have just like eat it. I don't know. If I talk in the head that I am now, obviously, probably it would affect me. But back in the head that I used to be
Yeah.
in, in the brain that I used to,
Yeah, I guess it's
probably not.
it will have an impact for some people and
And some not. And I think this is like with
some
anything,
not.
you've got to take it in an individual approach rather than a mass approach. But, dieting in a way when it comes to like calorie tracking and flexible eating and I guess allowing yourself food freedom and intuitive, all of these things, it does come down to having to have practiced something for a period of time. Like,
And it's also understanding that you can choose whatever method you want to choose, but you still will always have to adhere to calories in versus calories out.
yeah, and if you
There's
don't,
always
then
has to
it's
be some level of metabolic adjustments and one thing that we also probably need to touch on is deficit dieting and the ranges of deficits between having a small deficit of 100 to 200 calories underneath your TDE, because most people want to lose
in fact, we
a
actually
pound or
sent
2
out an email
pounds,
about this.
yeah, a pound or
just
2
now.
pounds a week. So then the general narrative is
I think when
minus
Mark says
500
deficit
calories.
dieting, for those that don't know what we're actually talking about, because look, like fairly certain that the majority of people listening would have heard about a calorie deficit. If you follow us on social media, you would have. If you follow a majority of people that are getting on board with it, you would have heard of a calorie deficit. But calorie deficit literally just means like eating less than you normally would consistently. And that's a good point, consistently. Because it's not just like one day you've eaten like 200 calories left and then you go and inhale like 6,000 the next day. Like that's not deficit dieting.
No.
Deficit dieting is where you, for a consistent period of time, you eat less, less food than you burn. And obviously, as we've mentioned time and time again, burning calories doesn't just come from yourself. Do you know what I mean? It comes from your external activity and expenditure and all of this stuff.
But what I think we also need to cover, and I'd like to just for you to go deeper on, is the different levels of deficit dieting. What happens when the deficit is too big?
Yeah, I know, but I need to describe what deficit dieting really is before we then go into, okay, like now we're going to go into like counting calories and stuff like that. So normally what has been sold for the information, the research that has been sold for many a years now is that if you achieved a 500 calorie deficit off of your TDE, which is your total daily energy expenditure, which is also your maintenance calories, and you had your maintenance calories, for example, that is your TDE, and you subtracted 500 calories off of that, that over a 7-day period, you would statistically create a deficit of 3,500 calories, which would equal 1 pound of fat loss.
Yeah.
However, that's not...
I mean, 500 calories generally off your TDE, from our experience with currents, is a large deficit.
Imagine, like, majority of the time, if we're talking about a woman, for example.
That's a whole meal for most people.
Well,
500 whole calories. So
yeah, and you've got to think about when somebody goes into dieting, a period of dieting where they want to lose weight. Again, if you want to give up, go and do the most extreme thing at the start because your body just doesn't like it. You're not going to have a good time. You are going to have huge amounts more hunger. And unless there is a real fucking need for that, there is no need doing it. You see, if you're, for example, the argument is if your TDE is much, much higher and you are either holding a lot of weight or you've got a huge amount of muscle mass or either vice versa, then your calorie intake, taking 500 calories off, might not be as extreme as somebody that is your general population client who is potentially a 65 kilo, 70 kilo woman, whatever, whose calories, they're 5'6" and their calories could sit at maybe naturally 1900.
Again, context,
you then go and take 500 calories off 1900 calories. You're eating at 1400 calories, okay?
This is when people get down to 1200 calories, which is basically the intake of a small child.
Yeah, and then you very much struggle to actually, one, hit your macro targets because your whole calorie intake per day will be protein or something that you don't necessarily want to eat. So everything becomes a little bit harder. Now we appreciate the different aspects, personality, come into play here. Like 500 calorie deficits for your general population client is not advised because they will not be able to adhere to it for a greater period of time because and you're going to start hating dieting after that.
Yeah, because the main thing that drives nutrition as well is obviously consistency, because if you can't consistently adhere to your dietary requirements or your dietary interventions, then the process just goes round and round in circles.
So if we go back to deficit dieting, like making sure that your deficit is not huge. And I'd just like to go back to when you set up what the fuck you're doing in your life in terms of dieting, you're always going to want to be starting at a maintenance period. Now, maintenance is technically a range. It is not an exact number, and it will depend very much on your energy expenditure, what you are, how much muscle mass you've got, your age, everything comes into play. Your lifestyle comes into play with that. When you look at your maintenance range, you then go, okay, well, how much do so I start in this range here. If you are starting and you are tracking, you are going to see big progress at maintenance because you are adhering to a target. And for the first few weeks, you do see, and sometimes for forever.
Generally, maintenance is a deficit for most people because
you're normally overeating.
If you're carrying a large amount of body fat, then there's an excess amount of calories being consumed compared to the amount of calories that are being burnt. So if you're reducing from that to technically your what is hypothetically your total daily energy expenditure, that is just going to be a deficit in its own right.
And I think also normally a lot of the time when people go on a diet, they also go and do something like more exercise, or they actively are conscious of how much they've moved.
Yeah,
and so that's increasing the deficit even more.
So from our experience with clients, when we do this, because this is the protocol that we use, we will see probably about 50 to 70% of the progress made within maintenance.
Yeah, big time actually. And then we'd look to potentially, if the client still wanted to make progress, or depending on the client's goal, if it was still fat loss, we would potentially adjust by like literally like 100, maybe 200, depending on this thing, but but depending on the time and all of this and what their goal is. But it's not a big deficit. We're taking what we subtract could either potentially be utilized by more steps, maybe overall, although that's not really, you can't really keep track of exactly how many calories are burned of energy expenditure, because it's very inaccurate.
Tricky.
So when it comes to intaking it, it could be just, okay, well, we're just reducing down by 100 calories, which means, it allows somebody to still enjoy what they're eating and still feel like they can do things without being like, I've got no calories to
As a
eat.
coach, for all the coaches that are listening out there, the quickest way to success is having a client eat, and this is also relevant for people that are general population. You want to eat as much food as possible and still achieve your goals.
Yeah, because like that's what
So
inherently
instead
we
of
all
cutting
want to
your
do.
calories, maybe look to increase or track your daily step intake, because unfortunately sometimes going to the gym for 45 minutes or 30 minutes 5 times a week and then not moving at all outside of your gym session does not necessarily make you very active.
Yeah, so then
By
you
the
could be very much
definitions of
overestimating
activity estimations when it comes to the...
I think it's always about finding balance, because I think that if you can't really, you can track habits over like
over a given period,
like an energy expenditure watch or whatever like that. You can definitely track a trend, but I think that if you want to lose weight, the best, forget trying to like increase energy expenditure and all of this stuff. Sometimes too much energy expenditure will make you hungry, which makes the deficit even harder.
I guess it's different, like going for a run and increasing just going for a walk is obviously very different things when it comes to how it impacts your...
Yeah, but that's just for another day, and it's very boring talking about what the hunger hormones. Now we're going to talk about hunger hormones.
No, we'll say
No, I think if we go back to deficit dieting, it's also about when is the right time to implement this stuff into your life, because we can go along the side, we don't want, best advice from this podcast would be, if you are to try calorie counting or your thing, just start at a reasonable number where you actually go, oh, okay, fine. And sometimes you could also potentially set that about 200 calories higher and still make probably just as much progress. You just always need to adapt. If you're losing shit tons of weight a week, then your maintenance will be higher than what you think it is if you're like tracking it that. So never think that like, you don't want to run yourself into the ground when it comes to deficit dieting, because it has a huge impact on muscle mass. And if you've spent
and just training in general, like if you're eating a low calorie diet compared to the training you're trying to achieve, it's going to be counterproductive to your recovery. And like Georgia said, your body composition.
So I think we should finish like today. We didn't go into too many dieting trends today, because some of them don't need to be highlighted, because some of them are dog shit. But the ones that are tools to a degree, which is like eliminating
shakes
food groups
and detoxes and stuff like that, we're not even going to cover.
I can't even go into that, because
that's just going to turn into us raging for about
I sometimes
an hour.
think when we actually bring up supplements that people then go and end up buying them, even though we've told them they're not
No,
good.
we will definitely cover supplements.
No, but that's not in terms of like, I'm not interested about touching on detox teas. I'm sorry, guys. Please, just like, if you know better, do better.
And all that nonsense.
If you know better, do better. That is my whole motto. Just do it. But anyway, I think what we're going to end talking today is that when is the right time for you to diet or to undertake a lower calorie diet to what you are currently intaking? A lot of the time we are either, I think, socially pressured to do it, or we feel like we need to for a period of time. So for example, like a holiday or a wedding or a this or a that, like we feel the need to lose weight.
Yeah, it's always constant.
And actually that constant mentality of I need to diet is telling you something that you don't have enough nutritional education as to like managing that, because you know, you should thoroughly enjoy your life in like eating, you know, being aware of what you're consuming, but also enjoying the food and having a social life and whatnot. And if we get a lot of questions, actually, I think it'd be a good idea to bring this up, saying that like, oh, I've got a lot of social plans in the diary, you know, I've got loads of things coming up, but I still need to lose weight. And what we come back with is adjust your expectations, because you can't do both, in the sense of overdo socializing and not sacrifice somewhere you know, because if you end up doing that, you're then ending up effectively on a yo-yo cycle of like, I mean,
there needs to be some level of balance where if you're like socializing, for example, is really stealing away from you eating a nutritious diet,
then
and
you need to
you
adjust,
really want to make adjustments to your physique and your body composition, then your expectations need to be adjusted. And there is a time and place for dieting.
Like,
and
for example, like
if you're going through personal grief, or you're going through hardship, and you're going through other things, is it probably the best time to want to lose weight or do
I
things
do
like
think
that?
going off of
Maybe,
that,
maybe
like
not.
a lot of the time when you go through periods where you're very unhappy. Now, I'm not talking necessarily grief. Sometimes grief can come out in multiple different ways, but I do think that one of the biggest things we pick up on when we are unhappy about something is the way that we look. And I think it's important to understand that like it probably would be one of the first places you would criticize when your life is not necessarily going to the way that you want it to go, or you've had a very hard, you know, something's happened and you can't manage it and you feel out of control. You know, understanding that looking at yourself and then picking yourself apart is not going to help the situation. So that time of your life, it is not important to diet then. It is important to nutritionally fuel yourself so that your brain can function better and happier, or you can give yourself the best chance of feeling good of your nutrition. But that's a prime example. You know, we have time and time again a lot of women who have just had a baby, or are very conscious that they've put on a lot of weight throughout their pregnancy, and they're like, right, I just really need to start deficit dieting now. And it's like, you need to understand that when you've had a child, not only is that like the greatest thing, like, you know what I mean, like you know, it is one of the things where you have a child to feed, do you know what I mean? When you start to breastfeed, maybe you don't breastfeed, but still the energy requirements from a first time mom is huge. You are going to experience stuff that you'll never have experienced, you know, like your
routine is turned upside down.
So then you're going to go, okay, and now what I'm going to do when I've had no sleep, minimal sleep, I've been breastfeeding, which already requires more calories per day, you know, I'm going to then go and undertake a deficit. That's not the way you should go about
it. You haven't slept you're feeling really hungry, and then you're placing these expectations on yourself to achieve certain things, and then when you can't achieve those expectations, then you feel bad about it.
But I think that's the time where you would look at something of building a foundation. Now, we're not here saying that if you're unhappy with the way that you look or feel, that of course you should action something on your own regard. You know, there are many people that don't like the fact that they might have put on a lot of weight throughout pregnancy and want to get back to what they used to say as their usual self, you know, and that's very different after you've had a child. But if you are going through that period of time, understand that actually that time is the best time to build a foundation to then, when you get past, you know, maybe you don't breastfeed for that, you know, too long, or, you know, things, but the routine becomes more and more, you know, manageable for you. Not that having children is ever manageable, but like, you know, then you can go, well, I've got a very good foundation. Maybe I've worked on building some strength through this time, or, you know, good nutrition. Then you can go, okay, I'm going to implement a slight deficit.
That foundation is based on education and understanding of nutrition.
And so, like, you know, that's when I think periods of time, you know, there is never, you should never always diet. So that, I think, what should we end with today is you should never always diet. Dieting should be brought in as methods or tools when you have a goal or you have a health issue in which you need to lose weight for, it should never be brought in because you just think
it's never just because.
yeah,
Do
just
you know what I
because.
mean?
And if
It's
somebody
just
is doing something and it works for them, just remember
like
it works for them.
deficit dieting or just dieting in general should not just be your default mode.
No, and in no way, shape, or form, you shouldn't always feel like you're going back to deficit, because then you haven't really got a very good balance between understanding where you can just sit at and easily.
And if you want to build a significant amount of muscle mass, you have to be in some form of surplus or within
I still think,
maintenance.
for general population, don't overthink that. You don't necessarily need to be in a surplus to build muscle
but
as a beginner.
for those that are listening out there that want to build,
Yeah, like deficit dieting will reduce your muscle mass. Like that is one of the things that you can't necessarily do both. That's why we always say maintenance is your happy point.
your
Surplus
happy
is where
medium.
you want to really take it to the next fucking
Yeah.
level of gaining muscle. But on average, if you're deficit dieting, you will see muscle loss alongside it. So doing your best things of trying to strength train alongside it, or
and eat a high
protein diet will help your body composition long term. But don't ever feel like you need to diet. There are times and periods in the day and in your life that are right for dieting, but don't feel like, this is the only thing that I have to do now is to diet. And if somebody is doing something that you think works for them, just either do some fucking research and say, is this actually really a viable option? Understand what you are doing.
Exactly. Or do they have the same context? Do we have the same context? Are we running the same race?
Yeah, do
take
we
a
have the
step
same
back.
lifestyle?
Exactly,
Is this
yeah,
something?
that's what I'm
And
trying to
most of
get
the
at.
time it'll be no, and you'll end up saying, actually, that's a shit method.
Yeah.
But there is very proven methods to work, and it would very much come down to your character, and to just understand that what works for you will not necessarily work for somebody else, and taking dieting with a pinch of salt.
Your personal experience, just because maybe you've seen success doesn't mean other people will see success.
Yeah.
So
And
don't go and push ideas onto people, because like we said, everything is contextual.
Anyway, I think today we're going to end the podcast right now.
Yeah.
So thanks for tuning in for episode 5. It's quite a long one today, I feel like.
Yeah, it is.
And we will be back. I'm not sure if some of you are aware and following us on Spotify or whatever. We now will be doing 2 podcasts a week for as much as we can update.
Yeah.
And so they will be coming out on a Monday and a Thursday every week. So you've got a beginning of the week and the end of the week to listen to our wonderful...
Save it, share it, please. Let everybody know.
Yeah, we will be going up on extra platforms soon.
Yeah.
So if you are on different devices and stuff and not on Spotify or whatever, then you will be able to listen to us. But hope you're enjoying so far, and stay tuned for
Thank you,
more.
guys.
Thanks. Bye, guys.